Chelsea maintain their 100% record in the Europa Conference League, the penultimate Europa Conference League game of this phase of the competition, effectively through to the last 16, a 3-1 win away at IC Astana in Kazakhstan. This is a very unique occasion in terms of the kickoff time, a Thursday, well, in the UK, Thursday 3:30 p.m. kickoff time. I don't think I'm going to see that again anytime soon. The nature of the changes in the squad by Enzo Maresca, debuts for so many academy players, and also, I guess, just, the nature of the conditions as well, like being so frozen, the opposition keeper wearing a woolly hat, and seeing literally the breath of all the players coming out. I mean, that is something quite unique, and the conditions maybe didn't help the game and the quality of the game so much. So in a lot of ways, how much do you take away from this game? I said before, it's probably one of the least important games Chelsea are going to play this season. However, I think for some of the players, it can be quite valuable. And I kind of think historically, when looking at all those young players, specifically, we know Achimpong was going to start. Raksaki obviously featured against Noah, and we knew Tyreek George was probably going to start as well. It's more as the game went on, Keanu Dyer, Ampa, Mecca, and even a blast from the past in some ways, Harvey Vale. I know that's weird to say about a young player, but given this was a guy who made his Chelsea debut under Thomas Tuchel in 2021, he kind of does feel like a bygone era at this point and probably doesn't have that much of a future. But yeah, I always think back to that footage, that classic footage that's probably been played so many times when looking back at JT's Chelsea career, and it's him coming off the bench against, I want to say, Nottingham Forest, and he's in an oversized autoglass shirt. He's got really, short hair, obviously young face, and he runs onto the pitch, and that is the start of a legendary, one of the greatest Chelsea careers of all time. So you kind of, whenever you see one of these academy players come on the pitch for the first time, even if it is a small cameo appearance, you maybe look at a Dyer or an Amper and you do wonder, are we seeing the birth, the introduction to a potentially brilliant and important Chelsea player? And I'm sure all of them dream of that being the case. And, you don't even have to go back to JT. You look at Reece James, you look at Conor Gallagher, you look at Mason Mount, you look at players who have been involved in some big moments with Chelsea, even if they're no longer at the club in some cases. We've seen, luckily, in recent years, more of a progression from academy players into the first team, and that's lovely to see. And I think my hope is after tonight that Maresca, maybe the extremity to the changes are unique to this specific game, but I don't see why against Shamrock and against Morecambe and in games of this nature we can't see the same kind of vibe, because you want to keep those first team players fresh as much as you can. Yes, balancing out with keeping them match fit, but given the demands in modern football now and how many games Chelsea are playing when they want to be competitive, what is the harm of trying to look and uncover players who could give you more in the future? So obviously it was a lot more rotated than I thought. I was still thinking that Joao Felix and even Christopher Nkunku might feature in this game. Not the case. In terms of that starting 11, Jorgensen, Tosin, Disasi, Veiga, Dewsbury Hall and Neto, in terms of age, were the most senior players. Of course, Dewsbury Hall, I don't really think you can class him as a senior Chelsea player because he barely plays, but especially Pedro Neto, who I do wonder if Neto, it's kind of punishment for himself getting suspended on Sunday against Spurs, which means he won't face Brentford at the weekend. And I did kind of think, this much rotated of a Chelsea team, some inexperience there, are Chelsea going to maybe come unstuck? And arguably there was a bit more pressure in the second half, but it became very clear in the opening 20 minutes that Chelsea were still miles and miles in front of Astana. Now, give some credit to Marc Guiu, who, the guy loves the circle button, he loves shooting, and he's desperate to score goals. I think him and Tyreek George, were in a competition to see who could score as many goals. And for Guiu, I thought the first one, yes, nearly all of the Chelsea goals, you look at them and it is just terrible, terrible defending. I mean, it is the sort of lack of speed, the lack of mobility, the horrendous marking at the Veiga set piece. Yes, we have to bake that in, that you're coming up against a really poor quality of opposition. This is not Spurs, even despite their defensive problems. This is not, your average Premier League team. This is, of course, a very, very poor opponent. However, he takes the opportunity, he scores again in a couple of minutes. And for Guiu, where these are the minutes he's getting for Chelsea at the moment and probably will only be getting maybe some FA Cup early round minutes, he needs to take them. And I think he absolutely took them tonight. So credit to him. And I still kind of ponder for his development whether he needs a loan if he want to go gets to another step. But, it was good to see. Raksaki, Chukwuemeka, Dewsbury Hall, Tyreek George, just kind of going through. I felt out of the youngsters who came in, and we've been speaking a lot about him in recent times, mainly in a more negative way. Josh Achimpong, I thought he was really composed. I thought he was really diligent, really professional. Chelsea didn't have a lot to do tonight, and of course, again, you have to factor that in. This level of opposition is not, comparative to even coming up against Brentford on Sunday, right? However, I think for a player who probably psychologically has maybe struggled a little bit in recent months, you're not sure how him being excluded and all the contract talk has impacted him. Came in and, like I expect from a lot of Cobham players, looks very composed, looked very ready. Internally, a lot of people at the club really rate him, and it's understandable why. Even in the very small cameos we got of him, I think one cameo against Spurs last season under Pochettino, we saw glimpses of that, right? And because of Reece James' injury problems, because of the number of games, I really do look at him this season as a Gilchrist. He's unlikely to be a regular starter, but I think he's someone who could gain more minutes in the second half of the season, which is, I think, a positive. I thought Tyreek George, desperate to score a goal, but I like the look of him. I think he reminds me a little bit of a very young kind of Callum Hudson-Odoi off that left, and kind of tricky wingers, and someone who, has a lot of speed. I think has a lot of natural things in his game that make him exciting. I just think at times maybe he's trying a little bit too much, but I think it's understandable for some of these players because these are the minutes they're getting. So, you're coming up against a weakened opposition. It's not the biggest game of Chelsea season. This is your only chance to impress. So I understand maybe that desperation to score. And, I think he was trying all night and unfortunately couldn't get that goal for himself. Carney Chukwuemeka out of the midfielders, I thought had a really composed and also quite decent night for himself. I kind of think that he will be off in January because I think he is a level above where he is at Chelsea at the moment, and it's not the case of a Raksaki, a Tyreek George, a Josh Achapom who, can maybe deal with being rotational. Chukwuemeka's at a point of his career where he needs to start getting senior football, and I think somewhere in Europe, a very good level, I think would give him regular football. So I feel like he could have had more minutes at the start of this year. I think it's a bit frustrating. It's taken it so long for him to get his first start of the season, but it is what it is, and I thought he performed diligently. Nice for Raksaki to get 86 minutes in the legs. I mean, that's a very big step up for him in kind of senior football, but I think he acquitted himself well. The defence, Renato Veiga scored the goal, but I thought his defending for the goal from Tomasov just before half-time was really poor. Allowed him to get into the box, very slack defending, and it kind of felt like at times Chelsea maybe a little bit too complacent because, to be fair, it was such a dominant game and it was so easy for Chelsea to knock the ball around, to get into the final third a number of occasions. And then in the second half, it was really about those other youngsters. Amper coming on at half-time for Pedro Neto, Harvey Vale coming on later in the second half, so to Mueka, who came on late on, and the last sub was Kayano Dyer. And all of these players, for them, Vale nearly scored a goal. It was a really nice play down the left between Veiga, George and nearly Vale, who was coming into the near post and nearly scored a goal. For all of these players, just those minutes, I really hope it's a chance for them to get that experience being around the first team. And I hope it isn't just a nice token because the senior players didn't want to feature in this game. Again, we do have two obvious opportunities coming up for Enzo Maresca to do this sort of thing again. Shamrock next week, and also, of course, against Morecambe in the FA Cup. Again, I think we will see more senior players come into the first team, but I don't see why we can't see the bulk of players, Achimpong, Raksaki, Chukwuemeka, Tyreek George, and even, the likes of Amper, Vale, Maka and Dyer, even maybe get some more minutes, cameo minutes, even off the bench. So I don't think that's a negative. And another thing, he didn't get off the bench, but Richard Elise, Michael Elise, brother, was in the squad for this game, which was a nice touch as well. So yeah, listen, we knew the fate of Chelsea in this competition a long time ago. We knew Chelsea were going to breeze through this competition. And this is a game that's very hard to analyse seriously because the opponent is so poor. However, I think if you want to kind of add something nice to it, it's kind of the next gen introduction to the next gen of Chelsea, which is weird because we're currently in a phase of Chelsea history where the first team itself is very young and still has players within it who have a long way to go. But this is maybe the next gen beyond that, and also a sign that there can still be Cobham Academy integration into the first team. I think Marc Guiu is probably the biggest winner tonight, obviously for his goals, and I think Achimpong for finally getting his first start, significant minutes this season, and looking composed. Hopefully now is the breakthrough for him to sign that long-term contract, to remain a part of Chelsea, and maybe become a more regular feature in the first team as a rotational option. So those are my thoughts on the game tonight. Let me know yours in the comments below. We'll be back to start to look towards the weekend with Brentford and all of that good stuff. I'll see you again very soon. All the best.